Today on TimesCast, Democrat Kendrick Meek stays in the Florida Senate race despite pressure from Bill Clinton to drop out. New GDP numbers show tepid economic growth just days before the midterms.
The movie that really messed me up when I was a kid was The Exorcist.
And two top horror film directors explain why people pay to be scared.
Somewhere between science and superstition, there is another world.
So Frank, the big political news of the day is that former President Bill Clinton tried to get Kendrick Meek, the Democratic candidate for Senate in Florida, to drop out of that race and throw his support behind Charlie Crist, the sitting Republican governor who's running as independent.
And who's saying he's going to vote with Democrats.
Right.
No, I mean, it's a pretty elaborate stratagem. This is an example of just how precarious the balance of power seems to be, and how anything can, switch one of these chambers to Democratic or Republican control. So any possible kind of way to tilt this at the final minute, I think, is being explored.
Right, so there's the balance of power question, but it's Florida, which is an important state.
Yeah.
And then there's the fact that Marco Rubio, who's the Republican candidate who's expected to win this race, if all three of them stay in, is expected to be a big star for the Republicans, right?
And not only a big star, but the greatest success story yet for the Tea Party.
Absolutely.
And so if he wins, those stakes are really, really big, because it validates, it ratifies the Tea Party in a way that they haven't been yet, and that's not something Democrats want.
So there's the question of, does this really sort of repel independents and move them toward Marco Rubio, the Republican?
Right.
Or is it sort of a smoke signal from Democrats to say, give up on Kendrick Meek and go with Charlie Crist?
It is a smoke signal. It's important to remember that two things happened here. Not only did Clinton urge Meek to drop out, but when that wasn't successful, the story was broken that plea had been made. And that's basically saying to Democratic voters in Florida, you might want to consider voting for Crist, because if anybody even remotely resembling your beliefs is going to get in the Senate from your state, it's going to be him, not Meek.
Right, and the fact that it was a week before the election, not even.
Right. This is a very interesting sort of game being played.
Third quarter GDP numbers show the economy growing at a tepid 2%. Not great news just days before the midterms.
Catherine, we just got the last broad look at the economy before the midterm elections. Take us a little bit behind these numbers.
We're starting from such a low base with such high unemployment that if you only get a 2% annual growth rate, then it doesn't really feel like the economy is moving anywhere. And beyond that, it's really not strong enough to add much in the way of jobs.
The Fed is scheduled to meet next week, in fact, the day after the election,
right.
And they're expected to take some sort of action.
Interest rates are already basically at zero. So what they'll be doing is they'll be expanding the size of their balance sheet, pumping more money into the economy in the hopes that that'll get the economy moving a little bit faster.
Well, what about other folks in Washington? What about Congress? What can
Right,
Congress
well, part
do?
of the reason why the Fed is expected to take these steps is that Congress is not expected to do anything. Bernanke has sort of alluded to the fact that he thinks additional fiscal stimulus would be warranted, but there's been total gridlock in Congress ahead of the elections. After the elections, it's not really clear that much is going to change. The Republicans are expected to if not take over Congress, at least strengthen their representation in the minority. And Republican leadership has already very emphatically stated that they're more concerned about the deficit than they are about the shorter-term goal of stimulating the economy. So it doesn't seem likely that they would do very much, if anything.
The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
It's Halloween on Sunday, which for some is a cue to take in the latest horror movie.
The horror film is as popular, probably more popular than it's ever been before, and both of you have made incredibly successful horror films in your career. Why do people love to be scared at the movies?
My answer is always that I think people are scared already, and they like to go into a theater and have their fears dealt with.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy?
Warren?
I actually agree with most of it. I think going to a scary movie or a thrill ride, it's a way to kind of get the adrenaline rush and experience the fear, the primal, feelings and emotions that otherwise you wouldn't really experience on your daily life.
This is a tough question, but what's your favorite horror movie?
I wouldn't say my favorite, but the movie that really messed me up when I was a kid was The Exorcist.
Somewhere between science and superstition, there is another world.
It traumatized me, gave me nightmares. I swore off ghost movies for several years after I saw it, so it really, really messed me up.
Well, I was going to say that, but I'll jump over to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was another one that really scared me. And I think the reason in both cases I felt like the director was crazy and dangerous. At a certain point, that person's doing things that nobody should put on screen, and that frightens you, and then you don't know what to expect next. Boom.